Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We welcome you to this evening's talk titled AI and the Future of the University, co-organized by the Faculty of Arts and Science at the University of Hong Kong. I am pleased to introduce myself as your host for this evening. My name is Elisa Suter. I'm a first-year student in the Faculty of Arts and one of the young global arts leaders. On behalf of HKU Arts, welcome to Race and Huang Theater and to HKU. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor David Pomfret, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, on stage to introduce our speaker and respondents of the evening. Professor Pomfret, please.
Good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to today's event, AI and the Future of the University. Last night, Arts partnered with Architecture for a talk by the artist Xu on the way that AI is changing how we make art and perhaps why we make art as well. And tonight's talk, also on AI, is another cross-faculty partnership. It's brought to you by the Arts Faculty, co-sponsored by our Faith and Global Engagement Initiative. And delighted to say, we're also partnering with the Faculty of Science. Dean Zhou of our Faculty of Science is with us. Please stand up, Dean Zhou, and take a bow. Given what's happening with AI currently, it's more urgent than ever that arts and science talk to each other, I think, across our old siloed structures here at Hong Kong U. And in fact, in the current moment, there's growing recognition of the need to question and to rethink the role and priorities of the university more generally. Just this week, you will have seen the president explicitly articulating a new message about the value of the humanities, which we're very glad to see. And in meeting the challenge of AI, the humanities is looking like it's becoming more important in the messaging of the university. So tonight, to get into the problems and possibilities of the present, the age of AI, we bring to you a talk by a cultural consultant, creator, and thought leader, Michael Schindhelm. Michael needs no introduction, and it's actually also quite challenging to introduce him because he has enormous breadth to his expertise. It spans literature, theater, film, and advisory work for higher education, and more besides. Michael's early training led him to study as a quantum chemist. He then moved into cultural management, becoming a leading figure in theater and opera in Europe. Between 2009 to 12, he was here in Hong Kong, and he was deeply involved in the master planning of the West Kowloon Cultural District, which turned out really well, so thank you, Michael. And along with leadership in cultural industries, Michael's contributions also include the publication of both fiction and non-fiction works and many impactful documentary films. You may have seen his film on the M+ Museum and the Hong Kong art scene, In the Mood for Art, or his film on a vaccine at the speed of light, on the BioNTech vaccine during the COVID period. Now, besides all this, he's taken up many roles in higher education too, in Germany, in Switzerland, in Singapore, in Russia, and also here in Hong Kong. And he's been advisor to many countries as well. He's been much decorated for his work, winning numerous prizes over the years, and he joins us at a moment when artificial intelligence is presenting universities with a profound challenge to their traditional value proposition. So how can universities respond? We're really delighted to have the chance to learn from Michael's decades of experience and knowledge of how cultural institutions respond to globalization, technological change, and to think forward with him. And what is more, tonight we're really delighted to bring Michael into conversation with experts from the two co-sponsoring faculties. So, from the Science Faculty and also the President's Office, we're delighted to have with us Professor Jay Siegel. Please join me in welcoming Professor Siegel. Jay's training, like Michael's, is in chemistry. He took his PhD at Princeton University, and he's been a university leader for many years, holding deanships at the universities of Zurich and Tianjin. He joined Hong Kong U as professor in chemistry and senior advisor to the president in 2024 and is now vice president and pro-vice chancellor teaching and learning. So he's really in the eye of the storm with all of these developments relating to AI in the university. So from the Faculty of Arts, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Rachel Sturken. Rachel, thank you for joining. Rachel is professor in philosophy. She is chair of the Department of Philosophy, as well as being associate dean for postgraduate matters. She's an expert in the philosophy of language and a leading contributor to some of the university's most dynamic and impactful units, from the Institute of Data Science to Concept Lab to the AI and Humanity Lab and the Hong Kong Ethics Lab, much more. And she's been a driving force, really, alongside her colleagues in the Department of Philosophy, of many important innovations at program level, helping to engage our students with AI from humanities perspectives. So after Michael's presentations, we'll look forward to our colleagues' responses and then to a conversation with you all. But please, first, without further ado, join me in welcoming Michael Schindhelm.
David, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, David, for this very generous invitation and this charming introduction. I have to start with a confession. Before, I just learned that you had a birthday, and I would like to congratulate the university, not David, you. I don't know about this, but I learned that the university had an anniversary, and I'm wishing the university all the best for the future, which is partially clouded, I suppose, but I hope that you are very optimistic about how the university is going to develop also during the next 115 years. I have to make a confession at the beginning. You heard already that I'm a little bit dilettante at a universal level, possibly. I should probably start with my presentation. I had a very short academic career, starting some 45 years ago or so, when I was trying to make the holes in the right locations of such punched cards in order to achieve some results in computing simulations of chemical reactions at an atomic level while studying quantum chemistry in the Soviet Union. And a few years later, in the late 80s, I concluded as a researcher in East Berlin at the Academy of Sciences. You may know that there was this major political change in also our country, which enabled me to do other things, and I migrated from natural sciences to first theater and then the many other things David has already mentioned. And I have to admit, over the last 35 years or so, I was always working in professions I had no formal education in. So I'm in some way probably not really the usual university person. And that's why you may wonder, you as very competent people with backgrounds in all sorts of sciences, what someone like myself has to say about the future of your university. And I would like to add to this. I have worked and still are collaborating with universities, and I have observed how AI has already started changing the landscape of education and research, and also the uncertainties coming with this. And the conversations with experts in the last years have actually resulted in this, what I'm going to present you today. And listening to what AI developers themselves have to say about their creation, I think it is probably worth to think of ourselves as experts of sort, because we all are, in one or the other way, involved in this. I'm not opposing AI at all. I'm using it on a daily basis, not as a companion. I don't use it personally, but I use it for research, and I have used it also for instance, such sketches here. I've integrated this in my artwork. We're doing sometimes animated movies for exhibitions with AI. So I'm not opposed to this. But I, of course, always wondered about what is going to remain of the human intelligence in the process. So what's actually irreplaceable of the human intelligence? During my work of the last 30, 40 years, there were two work modes which I liked most, and I would like to quickly mention here because, in my view, they have a certain role to play in the question on how we deal with AI in education and research in the future. The first thing is transdisciplinarity. That's why I'm extremely happy to know that we have today an audience which represents exactly this. I like to work between disciplines. I like the tensions and repulsions, the attractions between disciplines. I like to work with natural scientists. Here, for instance, with Nobel laureate Venki Ramakrishnan, or the president of biomedical research at Novartis, Fiona Marshall, who helped me set up an exhibition about the future of life a few years ago. It is always interesting to see how open natural scientists are to the art world, and to see their appreciation for the alternative intelligence at play in the art world. And the other aspect is, I'm also a writer, as you heard, and this is mostly a pretty harsh experience because you're left to your own devices. You actually work very much on your own, and it is often a big struggle because you may even think that you're great and it's all a disaster what you're producing, and nobody would tell you because you're on your own. And that's why I always appreciated environments where I was surrounded by other people. And theater, film, and opera, for instance, are such environments where you work together with people of very different backgrounds. For instance, to produce an opera show like Carmen, a blockbuster of the 19th century, you need 50 plus different professions to come together to make this work in a live event to an audience. And that is a very frictious process, but a very interesting, exciting process because you have all these highly specialized people around you who have to contribute this in one or the other way. So transdisciplinarity and co-working and collective intelligence, those are two things I have experienced in my life often as something extremely refreshing and important. And I think these elements of work are probably very important for our discussion in the age of AI. David, you mentioned already silos. Since the 1950s, there's a discussion about the two cultures in research, in particular science, technology, engineering on the one hand, and humanities and social sciences and art on the other. If you look at the funding landscape, for instance, here of higher education in the US, you would see that we are spending an enormous amount of money on building the machine, whereas actually rather little money on supporting the driver of the machine. So don't worry, I'm not calling here for a revolution. I'm not asking for a redistribution of funding. But I do think that what matters a lot in the conversation and the discussion about the future with AI is how this conversation between disciplines can be aligned in a way that you can respond collectively to the challenges, but also the opportunities AI is going to provide. And that is the point I want to make here. I don't think, and maybe that's the reason why I'm here. I want to make a proposal, as I did also to other universities, on how to reintroduce friction in a way that is desirable and could help to get a grip on this question on how AI can improve and enhance our education and our research. I will share this with you later. Now, you were very familiar with AIs all over the place. I saw also that you have an AI conference on governance soon here at the university. So everyone is kind of involved in that subject, there's no question. That's why I don't want to preach to the choir too much here. I just want to make one point which might be significant for the discussion about education and research, and that's what AI does to our brain. There was recently a MIT paper about a study conducted last year where they had participants writing, every participant had to write an essay, and they were split into three groups. The first group had to write the essay brain only. The second were allowed to use also search engines, and the last group used AI. What turned out is that the last group had significantly lower neural activity in comparison to the first and the second. It also turned out that the people in the last group, their cognitive capacity was almost flattened. They were not able to quote a single sentence precisely right after they just submitted the paper. And it also turned out that those who had first worked on their own and then afterwards polished it with AI did much better than those who did it the other way around. The authors of the paper coined the term cognitive debt, referring obviously to financial debt, and stating that we are borrowing from our future neural capacity for the sake of today's productivity, and this may cause harm because it may actually lead to cognitive atrophy. And that is a major problem. And I think this is what is important to keep in mind if we speak about the impact AI may have. I really like universities. They are very particular institutions. They are often very powerful. They play, in my view, the key role in the question on how intelligence will evolve in the future. And I like to think of them as gyms. And as we, lift weights in a gym in order to build up muscle, we should also consider going to the university to build up the muscle of the brain. And we could, of course, use also a forklift to lift a weight. And we could use also AI as a forklift in order to not use our own brain, but that would probably rather have undesirable consequences. Now, in my view, exciting aspect of the whole discussion about AI is that it sort of forces us to think of what is really important and generally human in terms of intelligence. What is the irreplaceable of the human mind? What will remain? What will be resilient to any kind of automation and consolidation of processes? And that's what I would like to focus on. And there is a quote often attributed to Albert Einstein, you may know, and it is interesting in this context for two reasons. On the one hand, it alludes to the nature of knowledge, which is not a solid block, but you could rather break down into different types, the intuitive and the rational one, and that we have for a long time had a preference, a priority for the rational part. And this might be something to be reconsidered in the age of AI. So the question, what kind of role has the intuitive mind to play in human intelligence in general? There's a long history of intuition. I don't want to go too much into this now, but focus on a few aspects which matter in my view particularly. A former physical chemist turned social scientist, Michael Polanyi, who was, by the way, the father of Paul Polanyi, who actually got a Nobel Prize in 1986, published 60 years ago a book named The Tacit Dimension, and stated right in the beginning, we know more than we can tell. So we have knowledge which is not articulated in words, but otherwise, or is actually, he called it tacit knowledge, knowledge which is not articulated. And he was, for instance, saying, you can probably know all the parts of a bicycle, but that doesn't enable you yet to ride the bike. You need to train your inner ear, and that allows you to keep the balance, and then you are able to ride the bike. And this is a specific form of knowledge, which is not factual knowledge, but it is important. It is often knowledge which we gain at an early stage of our development. We learn a language, we learn swimming, we learn navigating the real world, based on tacit knowledge. I don't want to go into neurosciences either because I'm not able to, but just to point out a couple of things. Tacit knowledge is kept also in a different region of our brain in comparison to factual or declarative knowledge, explicit knowledge, which is, as we know, located in the outermost layer of our brain, the gray matter, the wrinkled gray matter, or the cerebral cortex, whereas the tacit knowledge is kept in the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. And the limbic system, which is the emotional headquarters of the brain, plays a certain role in processing this knowledge and is very good at rapid, nonlinear pattern recognition and retrieval. And since the tacit knowledge is not articulated in words, when there's an important event occurring and we need to respond to this, we are not able to articulate this in thoughts and in words. But we do this through so-called body signals, and you are all familiar with this. For instance, tightening of the stomach or higher heart rate or goosebumps. Those are body signals which actually are the expressions of the tacit knowledge. So the tacit knowledge has actually languages or forms of expression which are in one or the other way very familiar to all of us. In psychology, for that reason, we have the concept of a dual system of memory and of thinking. So there's the explicit factual knowledge or memory and the tacit or implicit knowledge. And there is the slow and the fast thinking. The fast thinking is intuitive, is autonomous. We are not aware of it, it's unconscious. So most of the time when tacit knowledge is at work, we don't even think about it. It's taking place all the time. When we walk out of this hall, we need tacit knowledge to be able to do this, and we have learned to do it. That's why we don't need to think about it anymore. And that is therefore intuitive and unconscious, where the deliberate, slow, factual thinking, rational thinking is something we are very familiar with as in the processes of education and of course research and of course also otherwise. We thought of us as the only intelligent beings on the planet until very recently. Of course, there were religions thinking that the consciousness is also inhabited in other beings, but say mainstream thinking was probably that humans are the only intelligent beings on the planet. With our own creation of artificial intelligence, now the picture has become much more complicated, and that is probably one of the major questions and challenges, and probably also opportunities. Since the 1960s, we think of world models as kind of simplified copies of the reality around us. Everyone keeps in their consciousness. So everyone has a kind of a understanding of reality we are navigating and keeps this as a world model. This is how we live and work and think. AI systems, so far, most of the time, are large language models, at least of the recent years since the release of the first edition of ChatGPT in 2022. So we are used to large language models. Large language models are high-dimensional statistical computation models, and they are predictive, which means that they predict, in this case, the next word, and that enables them to answer our questions. In 2026, we are now experiencing a transition from large language models, which won't disappear, but they will be integrated in agentic AI. And agentic AI is much more complex and will actually try or will more and more appear in the real world. And LLMs, or large language models, are trained mostly text-based information, whereas agentic AI is usually trained with much more complex information. There's hundreds of thousands of video recordings of work sessions of real-world experts in order to understand the real world and experience. So agentic AI is trying to get a grip on the physical world and the reality. And therefore, in 2026, we are going to see more and more AI-powered robots and other things taking over services and actions in the physical real world. That's why AI becomes a world model too. Now, what's the difference between the human and the AI world models? Let me make it this analogy. AI is a librarian who has read all the books and seen all the videos about clinical surgery, but has never touched a human body. Whereas the surgeon in the real world may not have read all the books, certainly, may not even remember the name of an arteria which is broken, but he would know precisely how much pressure to impose on the bleeding in order to stop it. So whereas the world model of the human is embodied and based on experience, the AI world model is a descriptive system like a library and is disembodied. Those are, for the time being at least, the two world models we are facing. Microsoft made a point in their last annual report I would like to bring up here. They communicated that the employees perform much better individually since they use AI systems. So performance has become, and productivity of employees at Microsoft and probably most of these companies has grown massively thanks to the use of AI. However, collective intelligence stagnates. And that is because people are more disconnected from each other, working now in very close and focused relationship with AI systems. And this seems to be a worry for the authors for two reasons. And I would like you to understand these reasons because they are important for my point. The first one is AI, as I said earlier, is a statistical system, which means it will always develop results which are the most probable results, which means they are actually always the most average results too. In innovation environments, you may actually not always desire probable outcomes, but rather improbable outcomes, outliers, something AI would not support. So that's why the collective plays an important role. Already before, you all know this, how important it is to be reviewed by peers, to have discussions, debates, etc. So that's why Microsoft made the point that when the pattern-breaking, stereotype-breaking process of collective debate and discourse disappears, we are in trouble. Innovation may actually decrease. So, and that is the reason why I think the frictionless process of collective intelligence is extremely important, and I would like to discuss this in greater detail now with you. There's, I don't know if you met the person already at the board of your university, but there is now a new actor sitting at the table, and we don't really know how to deal with that, with this creature. Let me put it this way: it is a black box to some extent. We don't know, is it conscious? Dario Amadei of Anthropic keeps saying, we don't know, we're testing this, but how could he know? Because we don't even know exactly what consciousness is. So in other words, we may never find out if this other actor has its own intentions or not. And therefore, I think what matters most in the exchange with AI is that we preserve the human intent. I think this is a very important point, that we are not falling victim to bias and indoctrination through this other actor, which otherwise can be very helpful. And this is already taking place. In many automation processes, the human is always seen as the weakest link. And that is because often it's not that the human intent has been properly considered. And when there is a failure of the system, it is because the human was overwhelmed with the complexity of what is happening around the person, and therefore cannot keep the high alert necessary to keep the control over the system, and then has to absorb, is blamed for the failure. And this is certainly not the way how it should be. So let me speculate about the future of the graduate. I would like to think of the graduate as an augmented polymath. Augmented because I think we are experiencing this already, and this has of course also a long history. We will use tools. In the first place, AI. But I think in the future, thanks to a process I'm going to introduce to you in a minute, we will have a more interdisciplinary exchange of knowledge and of skills and tools, which will allow people to have a much wider context of knowledge they can leverage in order to enhance their own work. So I imagine that they will use also tools which are traditionally used rather in other disciplines for the sake of improving their own work. And that's why I'm thinking of the graduate of the future as someone who is augmented because he's able to use all these tools and at the same time has a more interdisciplinary background and network for their own work and research. And that's, now I'm speaking about the Friction Campus as a kind of cross-sectorial program of exercises or experiences to achieve this. You may remember I mentioned before the opera. What I didn't say is that in the opera, we usually have, they're not working together from day one. It's not always collective. In the beginning, everyone has to learn their own part. Because the singer, the musician, everyone has, of course, to be their own expert in the first place. And only after they have achieved a certain level of confidence that now they have learned the part they're going to perform in Carmen, they actually engage in collective rehearsals with others together. And this is going to build up then larger and larger until all work together. And again, this is a highly frictious process because when they start working with the others, they have to readjust their own part because they realize the way how they tried to do it for themselves wouldn't work. So they have to align their own contribution with the whole collective. So that's why it is a longer process of iteration between working collectively together and working individually together. And although this is art again, I think this is something I could imagine in particular also in the age of AI for education and possibly also for research. And I realize that in some institutions this is already taking place. On the one hand, you have individual work. People are siloed, deep thinking, working on their own project, mostly with AI systems, in a controlled manner, the way how I said, with preserving their own intent and not falling victim to bias or other kinds of manipulation. Once they have achieved the outcome they wish for, they break out into what I would call the interdisciplinary collision zone, where they meet with peers. And the peers are not coming all from the same area of expertise as it was so far, but they would actually have represent a wider landscape of knowledge and therefore also a larger diversity of angles and standpoints. So, this could be like a play where people in an experience learn to be adversarial to someone's presentation in order to help the person to enhance their outcome, integrating the different standpoint of, say, a social scientist for a biologist, etc. So, in other words, we are having in this collision zone the opportunity to integrate the standpoints of other sciences into what we are working on in our own research. I also think that this should be a marketplace for experience, as I said earlier. I think experience might be very important. I think it's also, when you think about students in the future, I think it is extremely important that students make experiences at the university. I think this is very, very important, that it's not about information only, it is about experience. And how is this achieved? In setups of that kind. And for instance, we know that every one of you have certain skills. Some may have a knack for materials or data, systems, others for nuance, language, narration, visualization. And I think this Friction Campus would be a space for swapping methods, swapping skills, learning from each other in the form of such setups of experiences. And again, tacit knowledge cannot be articulated in words. It can only be shared through experience, observation, or apprenticeship. And in a recent paper, it was shown that in the relationship between a teacher and a student, when their brainwaves are in sync, the comprehension levels are much higher. And this is not achieved through information, but through the performance they're actually having together. So that's the context. I would like to introduce quickly a few practices I could imagine at the Friction campus to achieve this productive and desirable friction. Cognitive forcing protocols are interventions used mostly in high-stake decision-making and automated processes where it is important to secure the human control, like aviation or clinical medicine, etc. And I think they are very good in slowing down and forcing you to think twice. And in the future, since we have two different types of thinking, the AI and our own thinking twice is extremely important in my view. And so what I'm suggesting is just one example. You can have this kind of protocols adapted on whatever you want to do, because there are layouts and can be adapted to how many people are participating in such a practice, what's the subject, what's the format of the outcome, etc. Just for illustrative purposes, this is one of these protocols where someone has to write up a report about a failure of a supply chain, and she would do this first on her own without using any kind of device, and then she would do the same thing again with AI. And maybe she would do it even 100 times, because she has she can leverage the computing power of AI to producing possibly 100 different outcomes. And then the result would be a gap analysis between both the human outcome and the machine outcome, and to sort of try to make a synthesis of the pros and the cons of both in a way that, again, she is the decision maker, not the machine. And she is able to select the choice she wants to make. Counterintuitive design is probably also very good in creating desirable friction. I don't know how familiar you are with this. It's used in many fields. Allow me again to make a reference to music. I'm doing this also for my friend Daniel, who is here today, and hope you enjoy that part. So when a pianist has to learn a very complex sequence, they start rehearsing this agonizingly slowly because they want to avoid a mistake. Because in rehearsing a piece of music, you're actually building hardware in your brain. Yeah? You need to memorize the thing, and you're wiring your brain in a certain way to be able to reproduce this later. When you make a mistake, the mistake is wired there too. So in order to avoid this, you play this in the beginning very, very slowly to ensure that you don't memorize the mistake. So when you play then later, you're not getting confused between the wrong and the right keystrokes you have wired up here. Again, this is something which can be used for many things and will allow you to avoid mistakes and bias. And of course, you have this in particular also here in many other practices, like for instance in Tai Chi, where you learn to keep the balance and correct the balance, the imbalance in case that it occurs, thanks to a similar practice. Now, I said already, the systems are accelerating and have more and more power also to get a grip on the physical world. And I think it is very important to find the right way for a co-evolution between the AI system and human intelligence. So we should not compete for the wrong reason with AI. We should find a way to co-evolve in a way. And I like to think of AI, the work with AI, to compare with learning an instrument. And I would like to show to you how when you learn an instrument, how that you go through 4 phases. In the first phase, you have to learn a lot of information. There's a score, there's a system of symbols, how they are related to each other. Later, then there's maybe the intent of a composer. And in the first phase, you're totally focused on the score. So it's your eyes being trying to absorb all this explicit information. The play at that time is very robotic and slow because you're not there yet. After possibly hundreds of hours of rehearsing, you will be able to focus now on your fingers. So the knowledge actually moves from the eyes to the fingers and to the movements, and your play becomes fluently because you're in the meantime, after this zero mistake method exercise, you know how to make the right strings and keystrokes, etc., whatever it is. And you at some point reach a level where you hear the music play before you play it. It's really happening. So that's why you have, in the meantime, abandoned the score. There's no explicit information exchange anymore. You're now really playing it because you have internalized the score. And then there's a fourth and the probably most difficult to achieve level, and that's the prosthetic incorporation, where the instrument becomes a limb. And you play not only the intent of the composer, but you're becoming an interpreter. And that's what you know from high professional musicians. There are 100 ways of playing a piano sonata by Beethoven, right? And there's a reason why certain people are particularly good in this, because they have achieved this level and have become interpreters. And you could say that there are hundreds of options on how to play a score, but you have to make a choice for the one you think interprets this score the best way. And that is a way you can imagine also, in my view, to work with AI. In the beginning, you learn, either you learn coding or maybe you don't need this anymore. I just read a few days ago in the New York Times a longer article where more than 50 software programmers in San Francisco were interviewed. And there's a lot of doomsaying currently about the end of software. And this was actually the reconfirmation that software is in the future still extremely important. And these guys all seem to be very happy being able now to vibe coding, because it would actually offload all the unnecessary work, and they can make now possibly programs much more complex and much more interesting than ever before, and they make a selection of what is the version of a code they want to use. So it's not necessarily a negative thing, but what they say too is that most of these guys are rather nerds and therefore taciturn, and suddenly they have to talk a lot. Because the only way to get a grip on the AI is to constantly talk to the system. That's something I can also confirm from my humble experience, that it is not that you just put a prompt there and then you get what you want. It is a long process of an explicit knowledge exchange between the system and yourself in order to nudge it into the direction you want it to. And then you, at some once you have achieved this, you may actually ask for hundreds of outcomes and make the selection of the one you like best. And that's the fourth stage of the incorporation I was mentioning. So, in a certain way, the AI system, with its high processing power, this high bandwidth, will be able to produce, of course, an enormous output of factual information, and you have the possibility to decide for the outcome you want it to be. So I don't know, actually. Okay, 5 minutes is. So then we have a break now, because I'm almost done already. No, that's probably good, then we have more time for the conversation. I just want to sum it up. And so what I was trying to tell you is that, in my view, we have two different types of knowledge. And it is always at play, also in universities and education and in research. Now, for the time being, we were rather developing knowledge holders, mostly of explicit knowledge. And this is becoming a commodity. That's something we probably, frankly, need to be aware of, that most of the stuff we have taught so far will be produced or is already produced by AI systems today. And people who actually become knowledge holders and have, therefore, maybe a very high level of factual knowledge will be exposed to automation, because this type of knowledge can easily be codified and passed on to the machine. So that's what you see already. Economists have already found out that, for instance, jobs which are most exposed to rationalization processes are exactly those jobs where you're usually doing cognitive work which is based on facts and easy or say logic procedures. This can be easily digitized and therefore can be transferred to the machine. And that's a major challenge. And that's why I think that alternatively, we should rather develop knowledge drivers. And I like to imagine them as augmented polymaths, as I said earlier, people who leverage a very high skill in using the AI systems, but using also other tools of possibly other disciplines in order to enhance and develop an interdisciplinary approach to their own outcome and to their own professional work. And at the same time, thanks to the fact that they develop a skill set which is cross-sectorial. This can be like, I'm good at visualizing, I'm good at narrating, I'm good at troubleshooting, observing. These skill sets enable them to become also interdisciplinary experts. And I think this is important. We should not only produce experts as real experts. Yes, they should also be in the future experts, but at the same time, expertise should become much more multidimensional in the way that it integrates also the standpoints and the available skills of other science forms. Yeah, that's mostly it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chindheld, for your inspiring talk. Please take a seat on stage when the seats are going to be on stage. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Jay Siegel and Professor Rachel Sturken on stage to present their responses.
You're supposed to sit in the middle, I suppose.
Anyway, wonderful talk and much more expansive than the material we got in advance to prepare for this response. So that's a good thing. And it also, but clearly we could go on for much more than five minutes. The thing I want to really focus in on is this proposal that it's the future of the university. And I'll work on the points of contention. Mm-hmm. Because I think we are a bit letting ourselves get off easy with the thought that somehow the university has been broken for a long time and now we really need to rethink it, and that AI is somehow the motivator of this. But I would think that this problem with AI is something that I call the outsourcing of agency, which I think is an inherently human characteristic. Mm-hmm. That whether it's you started with a slide rule, then you went to a calculator, now you use a computer, but that humans are very quick to outsource agency to technology anytime. But it's more insidious than that, because in fact, we're very quick to outsource agency to metaphors. So if we have a particular model that we like, we find that we suspend disbelief because the model is so seductive. Mm-hmm. And this is another way in which we give up agency. And it's even more insidious because it's also the way we deal with religion and cult behavior. That we believe there is a source of truth greater than our own self, and therefore we trust a raving lunatic like Donald Trump or a particular dogmatic doctrine. But these are all, I believe, part and parcel of the same problem. And the problem is that when you get to university, it's too late. Right? That really we're best at not accepting these at a very early age. That these skills are really the skills that need to be encoded in very, very young people. Along that line, it's very hard to train people in the benefits of this thinking if they don't have an internal voice and an internal problem. And so a different quote of Einstein that I like is, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. And if you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. And it's this idea that imagination is more important than knowledge. And that having a question of your own, having your own voice, that's what motivates you to go to your professor and demand to learn, as opposed to going to this external source of truth, which then imposes upon you something that, in fact, motivates this outsourcing of agency. So I think, let me just leave it at that, because otherwise, but let's stick to that scope, is that I think that this is an important question. And it's something that when I grew up and went to university in the 60s and 70s, I think that this was already in place. And it was much better then. There were many, many cross-disciplinary thinkers, whether it's a media person like a Marshall McLuhan, or a psychologist like Skinner, or a cyberneticist. There were lots of people having these kinds of discussions that I think play into your role of friction.
Would you like to reply first?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
I think I can have a quick chat with you then, both.
Okay, so I think my reply, I sort of want to focus on sort of reorienting the questions and discussions around the university as an epistemic institution, and how the sorts of things that Michael has been saying, how they might support the basic functions, epistemic functions of the university itself. So now I'm thinking about what is the university for, and how can we design these types of practices in response to AI that are responsive to keeping those core epistemic functions. Because, David mentioned there's not just, there's many crises caused by AI, but one of them is the crisis of the why. I'm sure everyone as teachers is like, what am I doing? Why are we doing this now? And I think sort of coming back to the core epistemic functions of the university is going to allow us to sort of rediscover that sense of purpose, and also help us guide the sorts of practices we want to be developing. So what sort of epistemic functions am I thinking about? I'm thinking about original knowledge generation. And here we're thinking, so AI, like Michael illustrated really nicely, generates knowledge of a particular sort in a very quite regimented, systematic way. It's very voluminous, and in the case of the epistemic functions and knowledge generation in the university, these are actually done in a socio-epistemic setting. So it's done with things like debates and seminars and so on. And it's often done in a way that's trying to generate original, really risky research that takes a really long time. And so I think that type of thing may not be capturable by just thinking about AI and what's the practices that Michael was talking about. Another, I think, important thing is the epistemic authority of the university, and not sort of ceding the epistemic authority of the university to AI. So I think we cede agency, but also we don't want to cede the authority and autonomy of the university to AI at all. So I think the epistemic authority is also something that's absolutely crucial that we need to defend. So I think there is a sense in which we really want to innovate and do these sort of new friction, polyglot, developing graduates in that sense. But I think it really needs to be guided by this core epistemic functions, and we really need to guard those. Otherwise, we're going to sort of lose the institution itself.
Yeah, thank you for responding. I have actually not much to add, because I think that was a very good addition to what I was trying to say. In my view, there's an enormous pressure currently to respond to the obvious challenge, and we don't really know exactly what is going to happen. And there's also a lot of confusion from many angles in the public domain. And this is not an easy thing, in particular, to digest for young people, in my view. So speaking about the inner voice, I think it is there, but it is also tacit in the meantime. And I think the question is how to enable young people to discover and to articulate this inner voice. And in my view, I think I was trying to be clear about this. I admire the university as an institution very much, and I think it's possibly one of the most important institutions at all ever created, in my view. And I really hope that it remains also independent, as you said, because otherwise we are losing probably really one of the last anchors of what makes the human. And that's probably a very bad thing to imagine. The inner voice, I think this is mostly my talk is about this, how to evoke this inner voice, how to help young people to achieve this. And someone from the New York University recently told me that they are seeing already that the Generation Alpha newcomers now, they come already with a frustration to the university, and what they hear most often is, I don't use AI at all. And that sort of reminds people of our generation on the 1960s, 70s, where people were saying, I don't have a TV. So it's a similar kind of counterculture reaction to. So there is actually an inner voice. Obviously, there is an agency also. And I think it is very important to establish a certain, what shall I call it, orientation for what is AI for, and how can it be integrated in the workflow. And in general, I think we are anyway already massively augmented also outside of the university. We're using all sorts, as you said already earlier, we're outsourcing all the time. So we are coming already pretty equipped to the university, and therefore the question is rather, so the person who is actually equipped, what is the person for? And what should the person take away from it, other than just more equipment, possibly? And building the human is probably the core essence of education, and therefore something which needs to respond to this. And in my view, it should be more experiential, as I said already. I think education is something people don't reject, as long as it is really also fun in a certain way. It has to be fun. And that is what sometimes, I have to say also, I live in Singapore, and I have to say in some countries there was really a kind of over-reliance on high achieving faction knowledge, and you know probably very well how this works and what kind of pressure it puts on young people already in school, etc. And I'm not saying there should be no pressure, but I think we have really overdone this to some extent in order to make them almost robots. And that is, in my view, not what we should desire for.
Thank you very much indeed. You've all been incredibly disciplined with time, which means we have plenty of time for questions. This is wonderful. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor, and please do raise your hands if you have questions. There's one at the back there, please.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful talk. So I'm a teacher from a Hong Kong Metropolitan University, and one thing I noticed in my school is that disciplines are quite guarded. In other words, the boundaries of disciplines, whether on the level of teaching or administration, is pretty rigid. And I assume that's the case for a lot of universities as well. So I'm just curious, Michael, with regards to your proposal of the friction, how would that be realistically conducted, given that these boundaries, whether that be on the intellectual level or administrative level, it seems to be pretty rigid or practical oriented, let's put it that way. That's my question, yeah, thank you.
Well, that's a very good point, and I think that there are limits to this also, and it would take time, but first of all, you need the leadership to want this. And that's, I think, key. Without the leadership enabling this and sort of introducing this to the team, it can't be achieved. The second thing is, I think you need to do this early on. It is something, in my view, like learning other things you need to learn to get around at the university. So it's something like a cross-sectorial thing for everybody. So because we have experience with transdisciplinarity, right? And that is, we are building another silo somewhere, and then everyone who is then for transdisciplinarity, there's also, they are very much transdisciplinarity, but this is just a minor fraction of the whole university, and the rest is not affected by this at all. That's not what I'm talking about. So it's not about building up another silo. It is rather doing something horizontal, which is accessible for everyone. And as I say, it should be a marketplace for experience. It could be also very informal in some way. And it should be something really the people arriving at the universities, students at an early stage should learn to adapt. And you probably would need to anyway make some experience again also with such a format to fine-tune this, to enhance it, and to find also the right settings. I just touched upon this. I have much more material than what I presented today about just the kind of practices imaginable to achieve friction, counterintuitive design, or also these forcing protocols and other methods. And they can be applied to everything. And that's probably the key point, that it is not exclusive for one or the other discipline. It is something like a cross-sectorial skill or set of skills.
So I just wanted to follow up on that sort of point, because one thing that was really striking me and why I wanted to sort of focus more on the socio-epistemic system is just because, like, if you sort of make everyone a generalist, then they're not going to be sort of well integrated into a tradition or practices. Like the silos kind of socialize people into a particular practice and tradition of knowledge. And part of the role of the university is sort of this intergenerational passing on of that knowledge and these practices. And so I was thinking that just having sort of like random friction and interdisciplinarity and then creating lots of generalists. One thing that I do find when I have like students that are off into different disciplines is that they do feel quite lost, like they don't know where they belong. And so I was wondering just how you would solve that particular problem.
Well, even I said earlier that there's still experts. There's still the need for developing people with a very focused expertise in a certain field. The Friction Campus has both. So there's a vertical and there is a horizontal layer to this, or dimension to it. So yes, and I think the augmentation will probably enable them also to still be deep thinking experts in a certain field, while at the same time using skills which can be applied to other disciplines too. So I'm not suggesting that there are no experts anymore. I think just the expert of the future is not a subject matter idiot, as we call this in German, for instance. Yeah? So someone who is idiot in the sense of totally focused on one thing and the rest of the world I have no clue about. This kind of stereotype. It's anyway not the reality, but it's not fiction either. We know, of course, that being focused on one single thing is also dangerous. And I think AI frees up also cognitive capacity. You still can be, in my view, a highly specialized expert in a certain field, and still have the ability to understand also the context and the consequences for what you're doing also for other fields of science.
Question from Chris.
Thank you very much, Chris Webster. I was the former Dean of Architecture. Great talk. I have a question about graduateness. I've always found in discussions about strategy and HE, the question of what do we want to reproduce as graduateness has always been a really focusing question. You give a very strong and striking answer to that, the augmented polymath. Right. And my question is really, is that realistic? On a historical reflection, historically polymaths have been outliers, and often they're outliers that emerge in opposition to the system. You're a great example. So the idea that we can normalize that and use AI to make everybody what used to be an outlier type. Question is that possible? Were polymaths outliers and exceptions in the past because of the educational system? Or is there something about human cognition and ability that prevents us and forces true polymaths to be outliers? Can we reproduce that?
I believe so, but I can understand that you might be skeptical. But for instance, architecture is a very good example, in my view, how one discipline can actually become extremely interdisciplinary. The say agency of architecture 50 years ago and today is very different, thanks to the fact that you have really conquered almost in a very eloquent way also, occupied fields of expertise which were not generally architecture. And I think we, of course, think of the polymath as something almost romantic of the past. And I don't think that this is really the current affairs. I know many people who are also part of the systems and work in a certain area of expertise professionally and otherwise have other skills. So I'm not thinking that the polymath is necessarily always the outlier and the maverick and therefore also possibly the anti-system actor. And I think this is also the challenge in a certain way to develop people in a certain way. I'm not saying that everyone will be a full-fledged polymath with different, with 15 or 20 different professions encapsulated in one, like it is in my case. But I think that it is kind of ideal for changing, for a change in the sense that I think that the expert of the future should understand better what are the consequences of what they're doing also in other fields, and therefore the frictionless kind of process of collective exchange should expand beyond one discipline. So,
there's a question here.
I've got a loud voice already, but thank you very much. Wonderful sharing, thank you. A lot of it resonated so much. My name is Brian Tang. I lead Light Lab, Law, Innovation, Technology, Entrepreneurship out of the law school. So the areas of engagement is friction. I've actually spoken at TELIC about AI in industry is really good for AI for frictionless productivity. But AI in learning is about friction, so totally aligned. Light Lab actually focuses on students third year and above. It's interdisciplinary, so one of an areas of pride is Hong Kong U has 10 faculties. I've got students from 8 of the 10. I just don't have dentistry and education for some reason. We are experiential, so the students work in teams with industry members, so they work together. We encourage them to use AI positively. So everything completely aligned. So my question to you is scaling, because that's a discussion I have with my dean, right? He says, okay, this is great, but how do we, so I set limits of 30 in the class, because to actually do apprenticeships, as you say, you actually have to, and Rachel knows, because I teach a class at philosophy, I also teach design plus at architecture. So how do you scale the friction campus in the kind of way that you might have in mind? And secondly, incentives. So we are a research university, and so the incentives are, it's researchers who have the highest priority and funding. What ideas do you have to encourage interdisciplinary elements, especially in teaching, in circumstances like a research university? Thanks.
I'm grateful for this question, because it brings me also back to the question before. I would like to make one more point, and this is possibly one of the incentives. I think job employment is something extremely uncertain, right? We don't really know what we are going to do in the future, what kind of work will be paid for, in which kind of structure you're working. So already the idea of there is a system we are sending the students to later, and I don't think that this is really the reality. And now allow me to make one personal comment on this, because when I was studying quantum chemistry, I studied this in the Soviet Union. I was living for 30 years under communist rule, and natural sciences were the only subject where you could learn free thinking, because everything else was censored, was brainwashed. So therefore, the things I was more interested in were not accessible to me. And that's why I did something else. So it was rather detour. But I didn't know in the first place if that would ever happen when I started studying. And only then suddenly everything changed. It was, for me, the most important moment in my biography until today. And I have to say, I went through several disruptions. And if you would have asked me at age 30 after the warfare, what are you going to do in 10 years from now? What should I have told you? I have no idea. And the same, I didn't even think so when I was for 15 years working here for the West Kowloon Culture District Authority on the master plan of the West Kowloon Culture District. A few years before, I would have never thought about coming to Hong Kong. And so sometimes I had to learn on the job. So reinforced learning is something I had to do very early on, because I wasn't even prepared. I didn't even speak properly Russian when I studied in the Soviet Union, but everything was in Russian from day one. So how to cope with this? And I think, although this is very frictious, obviously, and not always desirable friction, by the way, but I think the point I want to make is that in the future, we will have many more disruptions. Now on a more global level, there was the pandemic, there was the financial crisis, and every time some people tell us that this is a one-off and then we go back to normal, we never came back to normal. There is no normal of that kind anymore. And we need to probably develop young people to be able to cope with this. And the more legs you have, the better you will cope with this. And that's why I think, again, this kind of horizontal setting, which allows you to tap onto knowledge and skills also in other disciplines, is extremely helpful for that reason alone. And the first part of your question, as I said, it should be made accessible at the very early stage for everyone who is studying at the university, so that it's not becoming a silo and something special you have to sign up for. That would be, in my view, key. That it's really an offer to make an experience you would otherwise not make anywhere else. You can do it only at your university.
There's a question over here from Stefan.
Thank you so much. I found your speech truly inspirational. I teach European studies here at the University of Hong Kong. My name is Stefan Auer, but my biography is not dissimilar to yours. So the first degree I studied was in electrical engineering in communist Czechoslovakia, and I have no regret about it for reasons that you just outlined. And I would like to think that the European studies, the way we teach it here, is by its nature interdisciplinary, so we kind of live up to what you preach here. But I was more interested in the particular example you used there to kind of visualize, to help us to imagine what's happening with the use of AI, and you use a musical performer, an image that appeals to me. My daughter is a very accomplished viola player. I don't play an instrument. But I can totally relate to the image you presented there, because it requires a great deal of effort to reach that level of mastery that allows the performer to really make that performance work for us. And it is not done by giving a kid a piano that can play that piece, right? So it's just hard work to internalize that skill. So that makes me feel vindicated in my approach to teaching here, where I ban any electronic devices in my classroom. Students are not allowed to use anything, right? So I tell them I'm a Luddite, I am not afraid of technology, but I think for pedagogic reasons, it's a sound approach. And so that makes me wonder about one particular image you used where the young woman drafting something, then using AI, right? You are able to do it very well because you had no access to AI for most part of your life. But our students probably should not be encouraged to do so. So the question I have at the practical level is, should more our colleagues adopt my Luddite approach, or would you say that it is indeed important that they use AI? And you know, I sometimes wonder whether I would have ever learned two foreign languages, because when I emigrated from communist Czechoslovakia, I was monolingual. I only spoke Slovak. I moved to Germany. Whether I would have ever acquired that level of fluency if AI was as widely available as it is now. So I feel, are we doing disservice to our students, giving them this shortcut? And by the way, I think Immanuel Kant wrote about that many years ago. You would be familiar with that. Outsourcing thinking doesn't help you. And I wonder whether I correctly recognize Nietzsche and Heidegger in knowing how they're as your sources of influence for the presentation. Thank you.
You said many things. I would like to focus on one point, and that's the analog. I'm now 65, and half of my life I lived a more or less pure an analog life, right? So this was seen until recently as a handicap among younger people, and I'm usually surrounded by much younger people. So I'm using, of course, as you saw, I also learned programming, coding stuff already in the Soviet Union, but still I would say I'm not a native, digital native or AI native. But it is, and it's now suddenly it's a privilege. You know, having lived for a long time in an entirely analog world, we are the last. It will never happen again, most likely. Hopefully, actually, in a certain way, because there should have otherwise been very bad disruption, probably, if we go back to this. And it will probably not, hopefully not happen. But so it is a privilege. And I think this is also something we should pass on to the younger generation, your experience. And in my view, indeed, analog sanctuaries, or at least spaces where you don't use devices, are extremely important. And that is part of my Friction campus. I couldn't, present everything here, but that is certainly also part of it. And you see already that counterintuitive design is a very now, highly attractive also in how you use digital devices, because many people don't want to be dependent on it anymore. So actually, the providers of the devices themselves come up now with applications and other tools in order to make it very complicated to use their devices. Sounds actually also absurd in a certain way, but it is a very logic move in my view. And the university should certainly set up certain such design possibilities, including spaces.
So, Jay, should we have some dead zones on campus? AI
You know, I'm not into police states, and so I wouldn't say that we should force that. But of course, I see the value in it. I mean, if you know somebody who worked with a slide rule to learn their basic engineering, they're much more intuitive. They're much better at estimating than someone who went immediately into coding to learn their engineering. So yeah, there is great value to that. But if I can add one more component, which is this question that came up about expertise, and I'm going to try to get 3 of the questions in at once. One, Hong Kong is very special because we have a UGC that defines a funding model for the university that is extremely disciplinary and quota-driven. And so to the fellow from Metropolitan University, this is a huge issue that comes up. With regard to what Chris was saying, I believe internal motivation is so important. So I don't think the average person is motivated in 50 different questions. So I think they can get respect for the different areas, but maybe the outlier comes from the fact that the average person has a couple, at most 2 or 3 passions that they're willing to pursue. But all of this together comes to a concept that I discussed with my good friend Bob this morning, which is that coming to the university is all about the academic milieu. It's about coming together and recognizing that Chris is an expert in architecture and that Rachel is an expert in philosophy. And one of our biggest problems is that we ourselves and what we oppose upon the students are KPIs that are all numerical, dehumanized based evaluations. So when I look at, if I weren't who I was, and I looked at Rachel, my question would be, oh, I wonder what her impact factor is. I wonder how many papers she published. And she might tell me all those numbers, but they're absolutely useless to me because I can't answer a question that's in my heart knowing how many papers she published. On the other hand, if we shared our expertises, right, much as you're saying we're going to use the AI as a repository for some of that expertise, then when I have a question that's outside, I might have a micro passion because my passion to do X requires me to know something about Y. I go to Rachel because I know she's my colleague and an expert. And I think this sharing of expertise in what Herman was saying, in the cognitive system. The cognitive system is not just the human working with AI. The cognitive system is this room. And that when we see each other as nodes in this cognitive systems that are experts, then the system works better than any individual node. But as long as we see each other just as competitive points or measurable points, then the system never works better than the individuals.
I would like to, because you brought up something which resonated very much with my understanding of this issue in general. I'm not suggesting a graduate now suddenly knowing many factual things about 4 or 5 different sciences. That doesn't make sense. And again, it is anyway a commodity. It is going to be accessible through AI. So why should I do this? I'm not speaking about someone who has the factual knowledge about several sciences. I'm thinking about skills. And I think there are, and tools. And skills and tools are often designed and developed for certain professions and for certain disciplines, but they can be applied also to others. And this can be shared. And this is what I'm talking about. In my view, the Friction Campus is a marketplace for experiences where people in a playful way can learn to use tools in their own profession. And I think there is a great potential in this, and we don't even know it yet. It's something really to be explored, to what extent tools we use in architecture can be also applied to biology, etc. And to some extent, of course, it exists already, but I'm sure that this can be amplified. And I also think that we have the capacity, because other things we will actually not do ourselves because we have the tool AI for this.
There's a question right in the middle, in a hard-to-reach place over here. I think this will be our last question.
Okay, a really great speech, but I want to thank two other persons, which is Dr. Daniel and Dr. Jonathan. They bring me to this wonderful lecture from just the Life Worth Living CC yesterday. So to bring up my question, just now, Professor has mentioned the term polymath, and that was the thing I've stuck for almost 20 years because I've learned so many things like calligraphy, guitar, piano, and then currently I'm doing large language model agent, quant as well, but I'm a chemistry student. So recently I'm reading the book from Napoleon Hill and with Charlie Miller. They both emphasize the idea of the power of repetition. Do you think that it is still working in this modern era of the AI? You think that the practice of repetition makes us to more adapt to knowledge, but not skills? If you want to more adapt on skills, are you going to learn more and more things to learn how to learn new things?
I mean, it's a philosophical question in a way. Kierkegaard was writing a whole major piece about repetition. And he put this in a very optimistic way, right? So this is on a daily basis going through routines and repetition means you embrace your life. That's how he put it, the Danish philosopher of the 19th century. And this is how it is often seen. You can, of course, also say the opposite, that it means that when you go through routines, you avoid actually life because life is what is happening outside of routines. When you make new experiences, then you may also change your routines, possibly. So it is like almost everything, it has its two sides. I do think, for instance, you saw in my presentation, I was thinking of using the AI in a similar way like an instrument, and learning also using AI like learning an instrument. And as you know yourself as a musician, you have to go through a lot of repetition. And therefore, I think that's what you will do, maybe even more than ever before, because you may get the best outcome from AI by repeating the same thing again and again, because you can improve the outcome tremendously this way. So yes, but at the same time, that's again probably the vertical and the horizontal. If you get stuck in routines, you may actually miss out on many interesting experiences which are not part of this pattern. And you may actually get stuck in doing always the same thing and not seeing what are the other opportunities you should also test and check out. So that's why using only routines is probably also a dangerous thing. I think it's important, you know, these counterintuitive methods I was mentioning before are actually methods to force you to do it otherwise. For instance, there's I don't know how familiar you are with this, Elizabeth and Robert Bjork at UCLA, they have this lab, and I don't know, they are now already retired, but the lab at the UCLA of learning and forgetting, how important it is to forget in the process of learning. And they suggested many counterintuitive methods on how to learn in the first place. There's an early learning phase and a late learning phase. You really do also in your brain very different things. You do many different things when you learn early and late. And some things can be probably really also done in a repetitive ways, and others not, where it's very important that you break the pattern. For instance, what they suggest is that you have to learn many things over a long period. And then this is the only way how you can really access your long-term memory. Otherwise, you learn it now and have no memory developed for later. So I think counterintuitive methods are very good in breaking repetition, but repetition nevertheless is required too.
Sorry to say that we have run out of time. Thank you so much for your questions. It's been a wonderful discussion. And to wrap things up, I'm very pleased to welcome back to the stage a representative of the future about which I'm sure we are still very optimistic, our young global arts leader, Elisa.
Please join me in thanking Mr. Michael Schildham, Professor Jay Siegel, Professor Rachel Sturken, and the full support of both faculties, arts and science, in making this event successful. To everyone that has joined us this evening, thank you and see you at our next event.